This is Power Hour with Gabriella Power.
Hello and welcome to Power Hour. Thank you for your company. We have a big show for you today and let's get straight into it because the countdown is on until the November election. And right now, Kamala Harris and the Democrats are running a campaign that is insulting to the American people. And I don't use that word lightly, but it is hard to watch people over in America and right here in Australia getting swept up in the hype and are falling for it. It has been 17 days since Kamala Harris became the presumptive Democrat nominee, and she has not given a single media interview. Why is that important? Because we need to hear about her policies from her. Because if you pay attention, you would notice that the strategy at the moment is to keep Kamala Harris hidden, but not make it look like they're hiding her. She can still go to events with pop stars and big fired-up crowds to make her look young and cool, so people vote for her because of the vibe. Oh, and because she's a woman. So if she cares deeply about democracy and transparency, why isn't she giving media interviews? If she's as great as the mainstream media are making her out to be, then what's the problem? Are the Democrats too afraid after what happened to Joe Biden when he was exposed on the debate stage? Remember, this is the woman who repeatedly lied to the American people that Joe Biden was all there. And just on that, let's not forget that the guy who claims we beat Medicare and who confused Zelensky for Putin is apparently running the country right now and for the next 6 months. Let's not worry about that and the incredibly important job he has to do because at 8 p.m. he'll need some shut-eye. Now, Kamala Harris this week announced that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz will be her running mate. Why did she choose him? A guy no one really knows from Minnesota, a blue state, when one of the most important states in this election, the swing state of Pennsylvania, has Josh Shapiro, who, according to the polls, is the state's most popular governor. So it seems like that would have been an obvious choice. I hate to ask this question. I hate that this question is being raised right now, but is it because Josh Shapiro is Jewish? Some say that it is, or because there might have been just too much backlash because Josh Shapiro is a supporter of Israel. If that is the case, what does that say about Kamala Harris? Now, as much as the left is excited by the fact we have a black woman running and a white male as her running mate, don't fall for it. Kamala Harris has spent the last couple of years lying about Joe Biden. She's not an honest leader, and her campaign strategy is designed to fool you. Well, let's take a look at Tim Walz, who he is and what he stands for. As governor, he signed laws that required tampons in boys' bathrooms in Minnesota schools. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he oversaw the most draconian lockdowns and vaccine mandates in the nation. And last year, he signed state legislation that permitted abortion up until the moment of birth. And of course, he's on the record supporting the defund the police movement, which emerged following George Floyd's death in May 2020 in Minnesota. Let's bring in Emily Jashinsky, on her DC correspondent. Emily, great to speak with you. What do you make of Tim Walz?
It's a really interesting pick from Kamala Harris because Tim Walz is one of the few people in the country who tests the combination of populist economics with far left cultural policies, as you just listed off there. Everything from tampons in bathrooms for kids grades 4 until they're 12 years old. So middle school, elementary school, very young children. Those are going in the boys' bathrooms because of the bill Tim Walz signed, to being very pro-immigration. A lot of people would just flat out call it pro-open borders. He really has a full suite of cultural far left policies. And when you combine that with some sort of I don't even, so some people would say these are family leave policies. Other people would call them big government policies. But it's just a rare combination that you see somebody so far to the left on social policies, trans issues, immigration issues, abortion, as you mentioned, also kind of try to be the guy who hunts. He goes pheasant hunting. He tries to sound like I'm just a normal football coach. I'm from the Midwest. I think he's going to have a really hard time acting like he's just a normal Midwestern hunter when he comes with this full package of cultural leftist policies on social issues.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the American people respond to him. Let's look at the trans issue. Tim Walz signed a bill in April last year dubbed the Trans Refugee Bill by supporters, which grants legal protection to children who travel to Minnesota for so-called gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers, reconstructive genital surgery, and hormone therapy. It just concerns me that this is for children, Emily.
Absolutely. And it should concern everybody that many people in the American media are treating Tim Walz like some type of centrist when this is the type of policy that just months ago he was championing. He did not sign this bill at midnight out of the media view. He did it proudly. He was happy, eager to sign this bill. It has been a big issue for him. He's gone out and talked about how we're making Minnesota more welcoming and more compassionate. And so it's not as though he was ashamed of this. He was openly passing far left policies like these. In fact, actually to pit himself against Republican governors like Kristi Noem in the neighboring state right next door to his. So it's a huge problem because now Kamala Harris, everywhere she goes, is going to be asked if she supports policies like this for minors, for children. And she's going to have to answer that question. There's no way to get around it. Even if she, doesn't talk to the press, at some point she's going to have to. And that creates a real problem for her.
And why isn't she talking to the press?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I would imagine. The answer.
I mean, wouldn't we all? I would imagine her strategists say right now, the media is giving us great coverage without us even talking to them, which is a huge statement on how pathetic American media is right now. But they're saying, why would we risk popping this bubble, this honeymoon bubble, by putting her in front of journalists? Totally. They're going to give us great coverage right now, no matter if we talk to them or not. So just from a purely cynical, strategic perspective, it doesn't surprise me at all that they're not putting her in front of reporters. It's a shame, though, because she has a whole lot of questions to answer for.
Absolutely. And how democratic is that? Let's just go with a campaign strategy where she can be hidden and front up to events where there are pop stars and fired up crowds. But no, she doesn't have to actually answer any questions. But let's go back to Tim Walz. Do Americans remember him for the Minneapolis riots in 2020, where he waited 3 days before calling in the National Guard to stop the riots that caused massive damage and disruption?
Well, Americans absolutely remember the riots themselves. I mean, those images are iconic. Nobody has forgotten them. There are a lot of pockets in the country where people feel like they're still in, Minneapolis in 2020 because violent crime in particular, has not come down. It has in certain parts of the country, but in other parts it absolutely has not. And so that feels very real to people. So when those familiar images pop up on people's screens, and people then learn Tim Walz was in charge of Minneapolis, I think whether or not they specifically remember how he handled that as governor, now they are going to say, I remember exactly how bad that was. I know we all needed the National Guard there. And I know the left was basically out to lunch and was complicit in allowing a lot of this to sweep through cities in the Midwest and basically everywhere around the country. And I will judge you accordingly. It'll be pretty easy to tie him to the tragedy and the chaos that swept Minnesota in the days after George Floyd's death.
Well, we've been speaking a bit about him. Let's hear what he had to say yesterday, being pretty quick to make some jokes that are, frankly, gross.
Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, JD studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on! That's not what middle America is. And I gotta tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy. That is, if he's willing to get off the couch and show up. So, you see what I did there?
He's referring to a made-up joke about JD Vance, which is just gross, and it's pretty hypocritical to be making those claims when the Democratic Party seem to or pretend to care about misinformation.
I thought it was pretty stupid, too. I mean, that was his debut speech in front of the nation. And so for a lot of people who look at the world and say we have very, very serious problems, do you really want to go full goofball with jokes like that? Again, just strategically, I would think no. And JD Vance probably can't wait to debate Tim Walz. In fact, I'm sure he's very eager to debate Tim Walz. We remember what happened to another Tim when, not another Tim, actually. We remember what happened to JD Vance when he debated his Ohio Senate candidate. Actually, it was Tim Ryan, all kinds of Tims in American politics, but JD Vance was very capable. And so Tim Walz is riding high right now. I think you can even, he was in my home state of Wisconsin campaigning with Kamala Harris today. You can hear it in both of their voices. I mean, they're just getting fawning media coverage and they are riding really high. They feel great right now. But I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening because this can't last forever. There's no way it can. And so some of this right now is just springing from this totally outsized sense of confidence they have in their campaign. Byron York of the Washington Examiner made a great point today in his column. He said, listen, Kamala Harris has gotten some of the best media coverage you could ask for. People are very excited just that Joe Biden stepped down. And the race, even after all of that, is still basically tied. That should be the wake-up call that Democrats need right now.
Yep, that's true. There's still time to go. What do you make of the decision Kamala Harris has made? Why didn't she go with the favourite Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro?
I don't think Josh Shapiro was quite as good a candidate as some people thought he was. I think Tim Walz does bring some things to the table. I mean, as much as I think it's a tough sell to say this is just your regular Midwestern guy when you put Tim Walz out there, they desperately do need that. They desperately do need to seem as though they understand, regular Midwestern voters, especially rural voters. So I see what they were thinking in their minds that Tim Walz might do for the ticket. Whether or not he's capable of accomplishing what they thought he might do for the ticket is a different question. I cannot possibly imagine why their calculation that any, upset they would have caused to the far left by selecting Josh Shapiro because he had volunteered with a non-combat role in the IDF and had generally been pro-Israel outweighed the fact that he is the governor of the state that could almost clinch the election on its own. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me, even with the fact that I think as much as I don't like Tim Walz, he brings some things to the table. That is such a huge thing to bring to the table. I can't imagine why they suddenly decided it wasn't worth it to go with Shapiro. Doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
Let's look at Joe Biden, who's apparently running the country until January. He's finally given his first TV interview since exiting the race. He spoke with CBS about the election campaign. This is what he had to say.
If Trump wins, no, I'm not confident at all. I mean, if Trump loses, I'm not confident at all. He means what he says. We don't take him seriously. He means it. All the stuff about if we lose, there'll be a bloodbath. Have be a stolen election. Look what they're trying to do now in the local election districts where people count the votes. They're putting people in place in states that they're going to count the votes, right? You can't love your country only when you win.
Still making errors, still Joe Biden. It's hard to watch.
I can't get over the fact that we're not talking about every single day how this man is still the president of the United States and stepped down from the ticket, gave it to Kamala Harris, and did not concede that by doing so, in a sense, he was also conceding he should not any longer be president of the United States. In a horrible debate performance that made everybody realize finally that there was a media cover-up, that there was a cover-up by prominent Democrats in the country. And so when you watch interviews like this one he did with Robert Costa of CBS, it just... Again, it never fails to shock me that we aren't constantly talking about how to get this man out of office. I'm conservative. I don't care if he's replaced with Kamala Harris at this point. The man can barely stay awake through an interview. So again, just totally shocking and really, really sad. Like you said, it's hard to watch. It's sad to watch as an American.
It's so concerning. We've got the next 6 months where he's supposed to be president. It's not a short amount of time.
No, and it's a constitutional crisis every single day until he steps down because we know that he isn't capable. We know that's actually why the 25th Amendment exists, to handle situations just like this one. It's obviously something that should be weighing on the minds of many, many Americans. It is, but the media, again, has totally moved on from it and is not even having that conversation anymore, despite the fact that he's coming in front of their cameras and talking like the way he just talked to Bob Costa. It sounds like he can't stay awake for a basic interview.
Yeah, it's so painful to watch. Emily Jashinsky, Unheard DC correspondent, thank you so much for joining us on Power Hour.
Thank you.
The UN has admitted several employees of UNRWA may have been involved in the horrific October 7 attack on Israel. An investigation found 9 UNRWA employees were linked to Hamas's attack, which killed 1,200 people. Joining us now is human rights lawyer and executive director of UN Watch, Hillel Neuer. Hillel, thank you for joining us. Last time we spoke was earlier in the year, and you warned that Australia may be enabling terrorism if it restored UNRWA funding. And it only took our government a couple of months until funding was reinstated. Firstly, can I get your reaction to the findings of this investigation?
Look, we're talking about a supposedly UN humanitarian agency where 9 of its employees have been found by an internal UN investigation to have taken part in the perpetration of the Hamas massacre of October 7th. We don't know if it's mass murder, rape, other sadistic atrocities. So this is absolutely horrific. And what we're seeing from the United Nations is a kind of mealy-mouthed acknowledgement, a lot of spin, a lot of weasel words. We're not seeing strong condemnations of what this really involves. We're not seeing talk of the international law violations. We're not seeing talk of prosecuting these people. It's not enough to fire 9 people. What about their prosecution? Finally, it's not really only about just a few people. The whole agency itself is rotten to the core.
You mentioned spin. What do you make of the reporting around this? The New York Times had the headline, UN clears half the aid workers accused of taking part in the October 7 attack. Is that really the point?
No, look, this kind of taps into when there were mass violent riots in the wake of the George Floyd episode. We saw headlines like mostly peaceful demonstrators, hold a protest or something, even if they were burning down half the city. So this is the same kind of spin from the New York Times. 9 supposedly humanitarian aid workers were found by the UN to have engaged in the massacre. And their headline is that other people were cleared. By the way, the other people weren't cleared. The UN said that they just found insufficient evidence for a number of them, but they were going to take measures. So the Israelis only gave 12 names at the time. Since then, they've given 100 names. There is evidence. The UN acknowledged it for 9 people. The New York Times tried to find some kind of bizarre, inverted headline. Very disappointing for the New York Times.
UNRWA claims that it's continuing life-saving work with more neutrality than anyone else. How can that possibly be the case?
Well, it's ridiculous. The Colonna report, which was a supposedly independent review that was conducted several months ago, in fact, it was an entirely rigged process. The head of the review, Catherine Colonna from France, is a major on-the-record supporter of UNRWA. 3 Scandinavian groups involved in the review were all major UNRWA supporters, including Kjersti Berg from the Danish group CMI. She is part of a global Palestine network run by UN rapporteur Francesca Albanese that was lobbying to fund UNRWA. So the same person involved in reviewing UNRWA is involved in a lobby group lobbying to fund UNRWA, the same person. So this is the supposedly independent group that found that UNRWA had more neutrality than any other agency. Look, this is ridiculous. I spoke in the Dutch parliament recently and the Swiss parliament, and I said that this was like the Stalinist constitution of the 1930s, which was portrayed as the most democratic in the world. And maybe on paper, there were provisions, but this was a time when Stalin was executing tens, hundreds of thousands of people in show trials. So UNRWA may have dozens of neutrality manuals. All of that is meaningless when hundreds, indeed thousands of UNRWA teachers, school principals, other employees regularly engage in promotion of jihadi terrorism and incitement to anti-Semitism. All of this is documented on our website, unwatch.org. The fact that they claim to have developed neutrality procedures is just really Orwellian.
The UN was asked how the Secretary General feels about the findings. Let's take a listen.
What does the Secretary General feel about these findings? What is his view of it? Well, which is personal feelings about what the OIO has found.
He believes it's important that we go through this very carefully, given the fact that any involvement in these attacks would constitute a major betrayal of trust. Obviously, there were actions that were taken for the benefit of the agency that were very swift and very decisive in terms of dealing with the individuals who had been named at first. We want to make sure that the reputation of our UNRWA staff, our dedicated staff, including about 200 people who have lost their lives since the 7th of October, is fully recognized, and that UNRWA gets the support that it needs.
So the focus should be on the reputation of UNRWA staff.
Look, it's unbelievable. He was asked specifically, how does the Secretary General feel, his personal feelings about the fact that 9 of his supposedly humanitarian aid workers were found by the UN to have engaged in a horrific massacre, mass murder, rape, torture, other atrocities. And his answer is, we're most concerned about the reputation of UNRWA.
Unbelievable.
That's shameful. Absolutely shameful.
Absolutely. Look, you are in Jerusalem at the moment. We know that Israel's military is preparing for major destruction in the event of an Iranian attack. What can you tell us?
Look, I'm based in Switzerland. I was in the Swiss Alps. I heard that the evil Ayatollah of the Islamic regime in Iran was threatening Israel with an assault with missiles and suicide drones from Iran, from the Hezbollah terrorist proxy in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shiite proxies in Iraq and Syria. I decided to show my support and solidarity with the people of Israel by buying a ticket, flying here as soon as I could. I've arrived here in Jerusalem. On the streets, you will see regular daily life, but if you speak to people, they are very nervous. Speak to families, they're sleeping in bomb shelters. Children are traumatized. Where is the international community? The Iranian regime and Hezbollah are openly threatening military aggression in violation of the United Nations Charter. They're saying not only military targets, civilian as well. Where is the outcry from the United Nations? Where is the outcry from the European Union and their foreign minister, Josep Borrell? We're hearing crickets.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at another point, Israel's Olympic team said that some athletes have been receiving threats as they compete in Paris. Is anti-Semitism being normalised in your view?
Absolutely. What we're seeing today in Paris at the Olympics, and indeed around the world, is an outburst of anti-Semitism that we really haven't seen since World War II. This is the lowest level of incitement to hatred, demonization of Jews, violence, attacks on Jews in the United States, Canada, Australia, Europe, really worldwide. And the response by institutions that are supposedly anti-racist, groups like Amnesty International, in many cases, once again, it's silence. We should see the writing on the wall. We saw what happened in Europe in the 1930s when demonization of the Jews was allowed to run rampant. It led to terrible things. I think history is sending us a warning, and we need to stamp out any demonization of Jews. Attacks on Jews needs to be zero tolerance, whether it's in Paris or anywhere else in the world.
Just quickly on the US election, Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz over Josh Shapiro. What do you make of that decision?
Look, a little over 2 decades ago, the Democratic Party ran Senator Joe Lieberman as their vice president. This was an openly identifying, observant Jew, an Orthodox Jew, and it was quite welcome across certainly the Democratic Party and the United States. People welcomed having a man of faith, and he actually got the majority of the votes. They didn't get the Electoral College, but so America was ready back in the late 90s to elect a Jewish vice president, to vote for a Jewish vice president. Today, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing the Democratic Party radical left-wing fringe that seems to have taken over and actually has become not the fringe, but has become quite dominating, sadly. The camp that includes Cori Bush and AOC and other even more overtly anti-Semitic elements. seem to have taken over the Democratic Party, and they seemingly vetoed the choice of the governor of Pennsylvania, Mr. Shapiro, whose positions are, whether on Israel or other issues, are no different than the other candidates, including the one that she chose. So it seems the only objection to Shapiro was the fact that he was Jewish. A bad sign for the Democratic Party, a bad sign for where we are in the world today.
And I've had plenty of Jewish people say that and express that to me, and it breaks my heart. Finally, on UNRWA, Australia's opposition leader Peter Dutton says Australia should reconsider its involvement, engagement and funding of UNRWA. What should Australia do, in your view?
Well, the first thing Australia needs to do is to stop lying for UNRWA. You know, there were hearings held in the Australian Senate several months ago. A representative of your foreign ministry came and said that reports about UNRWA staff promoting anti-Semitism are false. He attacked our reports without any basis. You can go, the Foreign Ministry of Australia and Minister Wong and Prime Minister Albanese should go on our website, unwatch.org. You will see hundreds of screenshots from the UNRWA staff themselves, teachers like Elham Mansour of Lebanon, who works for UNRWA, as a teacher at UNRWA, who openly says, in the name of Allah, we need to slaughter the Jews. The head of the teachers' union in Lebanon is Fathi al-Sharif. He is a senior Hamas official, doesn't hide it on his Facebook page. UNRWA knows it. They refuse to fire him. Finally, the head of the teachers' union in Gaza, overseeing over 200,000 students for many years, was someone by the name of Su'ail al-Hindi, and is now on the Hamas Politburo with Yahya Sinwar, was the head of the UNRWA teachers union in Gaza. UNRWA knows all of this. The heads of UNRWA, other than a few Swiss and other internationals at the top, the people running UNRWA are Hamas terrorists. The agency is pervaded with terrorists. All the evidence is there, undisputed. The Australian government needs to stop fronting for this agency that is corrupted by terrorists. There are many other options if we want to help Palestinians. And sadly, Australia is embracing a group, UNRWA, that is only promising further education for generations of resentment, grievance, and war.
Executive Director of UN Watch, Hillel Neuer, thank you so much for joining us on Power Hour.
Thank you for having me.
Police in the UK are bracing for more violence in towns and cities across the nation in the wake of the horrific Southport stabbing rampage, which has triggered massive anti-immigration protests. We're now seeing counter-protesters take to the streets, and this is how one group targeted a car where the driver was suspected of being an anti-immigration protester. Let's bring in geopolitics and finance expert Roger Gewab. Roger, thank you for joining us on Power Hour. You're in London at the moment. Are you okay? What's your experience been like?
Yes, well, I mean, it's breaking out all over the country. If you're near it, it's very frightening. If you're not, you're not really aware of it. It's shifting between different kinds of groups. And we do have what they're calling this two-tier policing. So the Asian mobs that have masks and some have weapons seem to be having a bit more freedom of movement than the ordinary white Brit groups that they're calling far-right thugs. But it's a lot of name calling, and it's all very confusing and all very frightening. It's kind of like the riots we had in 2011, but very different in a number of ways as well.
A new YouGov poll reveals that 1 in 3 Brits support the current protests to some degree, but only 7% support the escalation of these protests into violence. The riots are, of course, deplorable, but do they reflect widespread frustration with the uncontrolled migration?
I think it's more than that, Gabriella. I think it's really the underlying cause is 14 years of the Tory elite, the posh boys, if you will, that really didn't take their electorate seriously, didn't really listen to them, failed on all of their promises, gaslit everybody during that process to how well they were doing, how hard they were working for us, and what great results they were getting when any fool could see that they weren't delivering what they had promised and that the country was going to the dogs. And when that was followed by 3 weeks of labor, pretty much showing that it's not going to be much different, in fact, probably worse, by also going off on a really serious left-wing woke rant about free speech and showing a very open door policy to unlimited immigration. That's where the immigration comes into it. I just think your average British bloke said enough is enough. You know, I love this country because it's so tolerant. We have the greatest eccentrics in the world here. You can live with your eccentricities in Britain and people just let you get on with it, and they're even quite amused. But when the Brits have had enough and they blow, oh, there's no going back, and that's what's happening now.
I'm also hearing reports of people choosing to leave London at the moment. We'll wait and see what happens. But let's take a look at some counter-protesters that have been filmed. This person was filmed appearing to be carrying a knife.
The activist I spoke to has been able to access one of the far-right Telegram groups, and he saw on that a suggestion that there might be a far-right protest in this part of Birmingham around this time.
Roger, it's just terrifying.
And that picture, that video, which has gone viral, almost every time it appears carries the caption that the police were not far away and did nothing about it. This is the two-tier policing that they're complaining about. I mean, can you imagine somebody standing around with a weapon like that and a policeman seeing it and not doing something? Now, if that had been a white Brit in a T-shirt and a pair of jeans, he probably would have been clunked over the head and arrested.
Keir Starmer chaired another emergency meeting and he vowed that those involved will feel the full force of the law. Here he is.
Over 400 people now have been arrested, 100 have been charged, some in relation to online activity, and a number of them are already in court. And I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week. But the message has to go to those who are involving themselves in this disorder, which is you're wrong, you shouldn't be doing it, and you will feel the full force of the law, as I hope we've been able to demonstrate with these swift prosecutions.
Roger, what's your assessment of how the Prime Minister has been handling this?
Very poorly, I think, is mine and the general assessment. I'd like to see a breakdown of the statistics of the 400 people who've been arrested, you know, just what camps they're actually in, because I think there's, as widely reported, a tremendous prejudice, as I say, against your average working class Brit who he's characterizing as a far-right thug. And as to immigrants and other people not of original British origin, I think they're being quite lenient. He's also starting to make noises that are very threatening about free speech, it seems. Certainly some laws have been passed that affect free speech as it was protected in universities. And I saw something this evening that you can actually be arrested if you pass on a video on the socials that they don't like. That if you pass on something that involves what's going on, that can be classed as a crime. They can knock on your door and arrest you, apparently. I don't have the details, but there was some allusion to that. And it's scary. It's very much like in Australia, where Albo made a speech the other day, really not dissimilar from Keir Starmer's, and it was followed by, I can't remember, one of his colleagues who said, unbelievably, like 1984, now, if you know anybody, you know, among your acquaintances who is talking and expressing extreme views, please call this national security hotline number. I mean, it was unbelievable. So both places it looks like they're cramping down on free speech.
Okay, I'll look into those reports that you're referring to. Let's talk about Nigel Farage, because he's had to ramp up his security after being blamed for the violent riots. Here he is.
Personally, I have to say I'm pretty disgusted by comments made by people like Andy McDonald from the Labour Party, Anna Soubry, former Conservative MP, broadcasters like James O'Brien on LBC, calling these Farage's riots. People saying, actually, I've been orchestrating, organising, encouraging the riots. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And because of that level of incitement to hatred against me, I've had to have a very significant change in my security situation over the course of the weekend.
Roger, it is so concerning. Where do you see this going?
I think there's two things involved with Nigel Farage, Gabriella. I mean, first of all, it's very convenient for his political opponents to be able to attack the success that the Reform Party is having with the electorate by conflating them with what's going on out in the streets. And because they are opposed to unlimited illegal immigration, claiming that they are the cause of these riots. Put the two and two together, it's kind of like proving that you don't, you don't beat your partner or whatever that old saw is. And then, of course, the other thing, there are a lot of people that don't like Nigel because he is very confrontational and controversial. And again, this is a good excuse to attack him for that. But I don't think many people can point to much direct evidence of anything that Nigel or Reform has done that have caused these riots, other than to be against, illegal immigration. But so are most of the people in the streets, it would seem.
I want to talk to you about the stock market, because stock markets and asset values are crashing around the world. You've written for skynews.com.au about the three entirely different and distinct factors that led to more than $100 billion worth of stock being wiped off the ASX in just a couple of days. What's your summary of what led to this?
Yes, well, I mean, it was a kind of a triple witching thing, Gabriella. Three things actually happened. The one that really set it off, and the biggest, was in Japan. There have been a lot of explanations about this, containing a lot of economists' gobbledygook. Let me try to simplify it if I can. I mean, basically, the Japanese currency, the yen, has been very, very cheap for an incredibly long time. You could borrow it for next to nothing. In fact, Japanese interest rates were so low that they had negative interest, meaning that if you deposited money in a Japanese bank, you paid them to hold it for you. That's negative interest. So when you borrowed it, the interest rate was minuscule. It was almost nothing. Now, a lot of people, many trillions of dollars worth of people, or trillions of Aussie dollars or pounds sterling, whatever, borrowed yen in order to buy assets of every kind all over the planet, which is not the greatest investment strategy because you can't really hedge and protect yourself completely. So you're taking the risk. You're borrowing in one currency and you got to assets in another currency. And then, of course, what happened is called the Japanese yen carry trade. Those trillions and trillions upon trillions of dollars became exposed when Japan recently started to raise its interest rates. And that led to what are known as margin calls, where the bank or the other lender that made you the loan says, hey, Gabriella, we lent you 70% or 50%, like a mortgage, of the value of this thing, but now we're lending more than that because with the extra interest you've got to pay, the overall loan is more expensive, so please give us some cash. Now, what happens when there are margin calls is usually a whole lot of lenders say, well, to hell with this, and they dump the assets and pay off the loan immediately. That's what happened, and there was a giant sell-off, and Japan suffered the worst fall in 37 years. And that reverberated around the world because these assets all over the world. Now, unfortunately, at the same time, people discovered that the central bank in America, the Federal Reserve, the Fed, had failed to predict some basic fundamental weaknesses in the U.S. economy around jobs and other things, which meant that the U.S. is likely to go into recession. That scared the you-know-what's out of investors even more, and they started to dump stocks there. That then caused a panic. And then the third thing was that some genius somewhere decided that all the companies that have invested gazillions in artificial intelligence overestimated its value. It doesn't actually think for you yet. It's just a data analysis tool. And they decided these companies are going to lose huge amounts of money, so they started dumping them. So those are the three things that happened. A huge amount of dumping of assets, which, of course, you know, if you've got 10 houses on a street and you sell them all at once, the value falls of all of them. And that's what's happened here. That's what caused the crash. I predict it will reverse itself pretty quickly, and, you know, we'll be back in calm waters.
Okay, well, let's talk about the US election. Kamala Harris has selected her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He's been described as being further to the left than Kamala Harris. What do you make of her choice?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do that, but yeah, he is. She's doubled down. I mean, it's a joke. I mean, I don't know how anybody could vote for Kamala. She was everybody's last choice. Nobody would endorse her until 5 minutes ago. She has an abysmal track record. She doesn't speak very well. I'm not sure her thinking process is all that good. You know, she's nice to look at, and she's funny sometimes. But, you know, she's not presidential, and she's so left. And the things that she's done are so left and so woke and so exactly what America does not need right now. And then she goes and doubles down and picks this guy, which strategically is so stupid. Now, had she picked Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, who's very popular and would have probably won her Pennsylvania, which is, you know, kind of sort of the state on which this election depends.
Absolutely.
If she had Pennsylvania, she didn't pick him, they say, because he's Jewish, and the squad, those four ladies, some from Somalia and elsewhere, in Congress, who are very anti-Israel and anti a lot of other things, are pretty much running what I call the new Democrats these days. And they said, no Josh, no Jew. And so she picked him. And I think she's probably lost the election as a result of picking somebody so far left with a track record of his own, which is probably not even as good as hers, which isn't very good.
And at the moment, Kamala Harris is just refusing to give interviews. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is set to interview Donald Trump on Monday. What can we expect from that?
May I just go back and add one thing about Kamala that I forgot to say, which is that I think the reason that Joe Biden is still president until January, which is of all the insane things going on in the world, and there sure are a lot of them at the moment, for him to remain a man who is not fit to run for public office, to be running the free world for 6 months from now until January, I think the reason for that is because if he stepped down from the presidency, as well as the candidacy he stepped down from, and Kamala took over, she would probably make a mistake before November, just like picking Walz, that would cost the Democrats the election. That's why they're keeping Joe in place. Yeah, Elon Musk. I'm sorry, ask me again, please.
Yeah, so what can we expect? Elon Musk set to interview Donald Trump on Monday. A lot of eyes will be on that one.
I think there's a triumvirate of three, maybe five people that are kind of potentially the saviors of all this. I think there's Donald Trump. I think there's Elon Musk, who has to be now, even more than Biden, the most powerful human being on the planet. I mean, Musk could put any country out of business in 5 minutes by repurposing his satellites and knocking out all of theirs. It's incredible. So Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, and I would add my friend Douglas Murray, and also Jordan Peterson, 5. I think those people can bring some sense and reason to the world, and I think that's what they're doing. I think the debate between Musk and Trump on Monday will be something very special to watch, and probably very exciting and rather exciting and inspiring. I think that Elon is getting a lot of flack at the moment because he's taken on the president of Venezuela, hasn't he? And now he's taken on the brand new prime minister of Britain, and Starmer and the Labour Party don't like that at all. But he's in a position to do so. He's also pretty right in the things that he's saying. And he's got a tool called X, which is the largest communications tool in the world now. So he's pretty unstoppable.
Roger, thank you so much for joining us on Power Hour. Great to speak with you.
Great to talk to you too.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have sat down for their first joint interview since Oprah Winfrey, but the new CBS sit-down has polarised royal watchers. Riley Sullivan is a reporter here at skynews.com.au and he joins us in the studio. Riley, great to speak with you.
Great to be back.
Okay, so on Sunday, Harry and Meghan conducted their first joint interviews since the infamous Oprah Winfrey sit-down. What did they have to say this time?
Right, well, Sunday was a big day in the Sussex household. First and foremost, it was Meghan's birthday. The Duchess of Sussex turned 43. And also the CBS station aired a pre-recorded interview with Harry and Meghan. As you said, it was the first time that they've sat down together on camera since the Oprah Winfrey interview now. And it was a little bit of a different vibe. You know, it was quite a short interview. It was only 10 minutes. And ostensibly, the point of the sit-down was really to emphasise a new initiative by the Archwell Foundation about online safety. And Meghan did hint a little bit about some of her experience, you know, with online abuse, and she hinted at her trauma in the royal family. The reaction to the interview has been mixed. You know, some people see it as quite refreshing that, you know, versus 3 years ago, the Sussexes were sitting with Oprah and very much complaining. Now it seems like they're at least, you know, appearing to do something constructive with their platform. But as usual, there still was that little bit of a kind of poor me tone to it. And I think that people were very quick to pick up on that.
Always. It seems like they can't give an interview without giving a bit of that, the poor me sentiment, I guess. Look, Eric Trump has called the Duke and Duchess of Sussex spoiled apples and suggested his father, Donald Trump, would be happy to send them back to the UK if he's re-elected in November. Let's take a listen.
What I can tell you is my father had so much respect for the Queen, as did I. My mom knew so many of them for years. I think you probably know that. Had a great relationship with Diana and everyone else. And, you know, that's a very sacred kind of institution. And you can happily have those two back. We'll happily send them back from America. You can have them back over here. But I'm not sure if you guys want them any more than we might not want them anymore. They feel like they're on a little bit of an island of their own. But listen, you can always have bad actors in anything. You can always have, you know, spoiled apples and in every orchard, but the institution of the royal family is beautiful, and it's something that's really actually admired by a lot of Americans, and I think that should be protected.
He makes a good point. Not many people in the UK really want Harry and Meghan back, but they might be getting booted out of California if Donald Trump gets in.
I think that's a really interesting insight, and you know, I appreciate Eric Trump in the sense that he did pay tribute to obviously the late Queen Elizabeth and King Charles, and he emphasised that, you know, forever, you know, wherever you kind of sit in terms of politics, you know, Donald Trump and his family do have a deep respect for the monarchy, and you know, at the same time, they're not really fans of Harry and Meghan. So an interesting update. I'm sure that, you know, with this presidential race is already going to be so consequential, but certainly it will be for Harry and Meghan in particular.
Absolutely. Harry and Meghan are also set to embark on another unofficial royal tour, this time to Colombia. What do we know about the visit?
Right. Well, this is the set of long-awaited next step after the Nigeria trip. Of course, that was their first unofficial royal tour that looked very official. I mean, you know, when you look at the photos from the Nigeria trip, you would be hard-pressed to sort of spot a difference between the photo ops they did and what the actual royals do. So I'm sure this trip to Colombia will be very much the same. They're there at the invitation of Francia Marquez, who is the Vice President of Colombia. Once again, this is an example of the Sussexes using their personal relationships with some very high-profile people to sort of broker these trips. There isn't a lot of detail at the moment about exactly when they'll be heading to Colombia, but we know that they will be in the capital, Bogota, and likely Cali as well. So I'm sure this will look a lot like the Nigeria trip, and it's just another opportunity for the Sussexes to spread their particular brand of royal fever around the world.
Okay, and finally, Prince Harry did another interview recently for the documentary Tabloids on Trial. This is about the British newspaper phone hacking scandal. What did he have to say?
Right, well, this Tabloids on Trial documentary, Harry sat down for this a few months ago. Of course, this is a major focus of his life. As we've often discussed on this show, he has poured millions of dollars into legal battles in the UK, trying to hold, you know, British tabloid newspapers accountable for allegedly invading his privacy. And of course, the most famous example of that was the phone hacking case. Allegedly, you know, within the palace, there's frustration from Prince William. He's really sick of not only Harry's attitude towards the press, but also in particular the fact that he's brought up Princess Diana in this documentary. Harry's speculated in the sit-down that perhaps Diana was also the victim of phone hacking. And from William's point of view, you know, he's really sick of this because this is a recurring theme now for Harry when he's in court and also talking to the media, trying to drum up sympathy. He's drawing parallels between his life and Meghan's life with Princess Diana's life. And I think it's kind of apples and oranges, like, to borrow a phrase from Eric Trump, you know, I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare what they've been through to Princess Diana. And you can understand from Will's point of view, he's like, look, you know, this is our mother. Can you stop bringing her up for your own sort of personal publicity? Yeah, no, absolutely. Well said. Riley Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us on Power Hour.
Great to see you. And that is Power Hour. Thank you for your company. We'll see you next week. Make sure you subscribe to Sky News Australia on YouTube.